Hello and welcome to a podcast about something. Today we're talking old school video games. This is part one of a 3 or 4 part series. We'll see. I have got Dan from the Save Point podcast. Dan, you want to introduce yourself and your podcast a little bit?
Well, first off, thank you for having me, Calvin. This is awesome. This is my first guest appearance on a different person's podcast, so I thank you for having
I'm
me.
glad to have you.
Thank you. But no, as you said, I'm the host of the Save Point podcast. Basically, we just talk about what's going on in the industry of video games for that week, what we feel, rumors and such, and reviews and what we're playing. You can find us on Podbean. Just if you actually go into Google and just put in the Save Point podcast, we are actually the first ones that pop up. So yeah, please download us. You can find us on iTunes, Google, Spotify, really anywhere that you can find a podcast. Just put in the Save Point podcast and you'll find us.
Awesome. Yeah, check them out. Like I said, we're going to talk old school video games today. This is going to be a 3 or 4 part series. I don't know how deep we're going to go into old school, but this is part 1. We're just going to take a journey through video games of the past with different video game podcasters. We've got Dan from the Save Point this week, and we're going to have somebody next month to do, part 2, and then we'll have a third person do part 3. And if there's a part 4, who knows who'll be here. But basically, in each episode, we're going to be discussing a different generation of gaming and what it meant to the gaming community at the time and what it means to the gaming community now. We'll be talking about what we like and dislike about each generation, and mostly at-home consoles, maybe a little handheld. And for this one, we're doing arcade and basically anything before the NES console at home. So Atari, Commodore 64, Apple II, really anything like that you would have played on before the NES really broke ground and got in pretty much everyone's houses.
Absolutely. I have extensive knowledge of some of these consoles that came out pre NES, so can't wait.
That's great because the only one I played, and we'll talk about this a little later, the only one I ever played was Atari. We had an Atari, so that was the only one I played, but I spent a lot of time at arcades playing different arcade games. So
yep,
I'll focus more on that when we get to it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, the first thing I wanted to talk about was, what do you think the main difference between games of today and like retro pre-internet games, let's call them, not just arcade and NES, but basically anything before the interconnectivity of the internet brought people together in that way?
I think there's 2 big differences, and one is obviously the overarching one, and that's the graphics. Obviously, graphics have come such a tremendous leap from what retro gaming was, from the 8-bit, to 16-bit to 32-bit to 64, all the way up to now we're getting whatever, the 4K native or 4K, upscaled, whatever it is now. So I think just obviously just the detail that they're able to put into games is probably the biggest difference. But I think the other one too is that, and maybe people sometimes don't think of this, is when you bought a retro game back then, that was the game that you got.
Yeah.
That was it. That was what was done. That was the code that was put into it, and that's what you got, glitches and all. Now we have this fascination, and I think that sometimes it's depending on how it's done. I think sometimes it's you could call it laziness on a developer, but some people call it smarts on a developer is to get a game out, but then we can patch it. Then we can put a patch note in. We have a day 1 patch or a day 0 patch. And I like that, but sometimes it gets bogged down because of the internet, because of bottlenecks, and everybody's trying to buy the game. I mean, how many times have we seen a game that needs some form of online interconnectivity and we can't play it because servers are congested, or the download is not happening, or the download takes 12 hours on something that should take an hour.
I remember when I got my PS4, I was all ready to play, and I had to wait like 3 hours for... I probably got it 2 weeks after it released, so there were probably 4 new patches that had to go in 2 weeks. And it, I got it, and you got to wait 4 hours to play. That's not very... And then you put your game in, and that's got to download, and that takes another hour to get its, day 0 patches or whatever. And you can't just pick it up and play. That's the thing. The biggest difference I see is like the pick up and playability. Like I have
Mhm.
consoles in my house going, or I have emulators going back to NES. I have a MAME arcade emulator, and like anytime I want, I can just jump in and out of those games. With the emulators, you can use save points and stuff like that, which sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just fun to start at the beginning of the game and see how far you can play in an hour, and then you got to go, and it's no big deal. But like with games today, it's like, all right, I want to jump in and play. Oh, it needs an update. That's 5 minutes at least that I'm not getting to play, and then it's, oh, the controls are so diverse. You've got to kind of, if you haven't played it in a while, you've got to remember where you were and how
Yep.
the
Yep.
controls work. I have a Switch, and I've started playing Skyrim on the Switch,
Hmm.
and I'll go a week or two in between playing, and then I'll play for a week, and then I'll put it down and not play for 2 weeks or so, and then I'll pick it back up, and I have to relearn the game every time, and I have no idea where I am in the story or what's going on, and I'll
Hmm.
walk somewhere in Skyrim, and all of a sudden all the guards will be trying to kill me because apparently I stole something in that area the last time I was there, and I'm just like, oh, great, this is fun. So it's not like Mario where you just turn it on and you got to jump on that first Goomba and you're good to go.
Exactly. I actually, as a little Skyrim story, I bought it on a Steam sale about 2 or 3 years ago. I finally was able to afford a gaming PC, and I'm playing it and playing it and playing it, and then I stopped playing it, and I picked it up probably about 8 months later, and I'm like, why in the hell did I stop playing Skyrim? And I go on, and what happened was I ended up becoming a vampire, and because I went through a coven, and I got bit, and I never took care of it. And what I did was
Uh,
the guy that's supposed to cure me, I ended up attacking, but it ended up saving that part, and that was my only save. So every time that I opened up the game, I had guards and this guy trying to kill me because I'm a vampire now. So I'm just like screw this, and I'm like, no, I'm done.
that's kind of where I am right now. Is whatever township I'm in that my next mission was in. Apparently, I did something pretty bad there, and every time I spawn right now, there's just 30 guards coming after me. So I've tried sneaking around and getting somewhere where like they're not after me, and you can't fast travel when you're under attack and all that.
No.
So it's been impossible. And once I finally get out of there, I'll probably play it more. But right now, I'm stuck, and I'm just like, whatever. I'll play Mario Tennis some more.
There you go. There you go.
That another thing you said, the graphics are one of the things that changed. I assume you still play older video games as well as new games. Does that really make a difference? Like, do you care that when you pick up Zelda on NES that it's not Zelda Breath of the Wind
Breath of
or
the
Breath of
Wild.
the Wild? Breath of the Wild, yeah.
Um, I think it depends on the game. So I was in line and I ended up getting an NES Classic and a Super NES Classic, um, and it,
Mhm.
and I mean there's certain games it's like, oh my god, I pick up the game and I started playing it and I'm just like, oh my god, I can't believe how horrible these graphics are, and it's like how in the hell did I ever play this? Um,
What's one of those that you would say going back to it now that's like I can't do this? Because all the ones I've gone back and played, I'm like, it's not that bad.
I think I want to preface this a little bit that I did a certain thing to both of them, so I have some games that didn't necessarily come on them.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So
I already mentioned my habits, so you're no judgment here.
yeah, there you go. So like I was playing virtual. What is it? The not virtual. I'm sorry. The Bart the Simpsons one where he is in his dream state. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and he has to put the paper, so he has to jump on the papers and all of that.
Yep.
And like I couldn't get the angles or whatever like that, and it's just
That game is very bad and hard to get the hang of going
e-
back to.
exactly. And then like on the regular NES, I'll stick with the Simpsons, the Alien one. I mean, which was just it was just absolutely so hard to kind of jump because there was no depth to the 2D of it. But
Hmm.
I don't think that it's like I can't believe I ever played this game and played it as much as I did because I started to see myself kind of get frustrated with it. But then I take a game like NBA Jam, which was on, obviously on Super Nintendo, and and I love it. I mean, it's the graphics are so blurry and all of that, but it's just so much fun that
Have
like
you played like the updated versions of NBA Jam? Like not like they did an actual release a few years ago that was terrible, but like the remastered versions that they've released in some like the online shops.
I did, and like I said, it kind of I kind of lose that nostalgia of the game. Like I didn't
Yeah.
have that same feeling, but then I'm playing it on the Super Nintendo Classic that I have, and I'm like, this is right where I left off. This is what I loved about it. So I think it just kind of comes down to that title of what you want to play. You know, we'll go back to Zelda. Breath of the Wild is a wonderful, absolute masterpiece of a game. Um, but I wouldn't change Link, the one of the first Zelda games, or the original Zelda, where it was just the scrolling map that you would go back and forth with. I wouldn't change that a thing about it. I wouldn't want to
Mhm.
see an updated 3D esque remaster of that game. It's like keep that game the masterpiece that it is.
Yeah, that
Um,
would be very weird.
Yes. So like I said, I think it really kind of goes down to the game that you're playing and the preference that you have. So I don't think that graphics make it better nor worse. I just think it's the preference of who you are and how you want to remember that game.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like we were talking about with NBA Jam, like if you play those remastered versions, it just doesn't feel right. But you go back and play on SNES or you play it. I've got a stand up arcade in my room that I'll play it on all the time, and I would much rather do that than play any of the remastered versions.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
and even like a game like Crash Bandicoot going because they just released the Insane trilogy or whatever.
Correct.
Like I've seen videos of that, and like I don't want to play it. I'd rather I still have a PlayStation 2. I can put the game in there, and I would rather play it that way. I'm sure they've made some adjustments that are helpful, but honestly, I'd rather play the original versions of those.
I'll even throw another one out there. And that was, and shit, I just lost it. Oh, Ninja Turtles.
Yes.
I mean, you got the original Ninja Turtles that you played. I mean, if you remember any arcade game, the first
Yeah, we'll
Ninja
get to
Turtles.
that when we talk about the arcades, but
Yeah,
yes.
but I mean, it's that first iconic level of walking through the apartment that's on fire. You know,
Yep.
but then they released kind of the same similar type of game on the PlayStation or the Xbox or whatever it was a couple years ago, and it's
I
just like
remember that.
I just can't get into it. Like it just does not feel the same. It's not a bad game, but by far, I'm not trying to dig on the developer, but it's just like some games are just meant to stay in that retro realm. You know,
Yeah. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't necessary. Like it'd be better just to play the original game.
correct.
And then one last kind of interview-esque question before we jump into the main event. What do you think made retro games so challenging, and is it a good or bad thing?
I think what made retro gaming so challenging was the controller and the limitations that developers had with the controllers. I think the developers wanted to put so much into a game, but realized that they were limited because of how a person could move, also the size of the actual game too. So to get back to controller, I mean, if you look at the Nintendo or if you look at the Sega Master System or even the Atari, you had a joystick and a button, or you had basically six buttons that you could work with. So your limitations of what somebody tried to want to do sometimes just never would, kind of um, see what developers like thought process was in the game. Like the developer thought, oh, somebody would be able to do this, and some people it took years to try to figure out. Oh, that's what the developer wanted me to do, and it made a lot of retro games very linear. That whole thought of an
Hmm.
open world just didn't exist because, and this gets into my second part, is there was just never enough room to make an open world. I mean, you had kind of the ET, but I mean, ET game, one was horrible. Um, but I mean, you could go on one side of the screen to another side of the screen to another side of the screen, but it was basically the same. Like you couldn't put any detail into it. So it became just extremely
Hmm.
repetitive. So to have that thought process of what an open world would be developers couldn't do it. So I think it became, so then, like I said, it just moves everything into such a linear path that if you miss something, then you have to kind of go all the way back and kind of pick up that thing that you missed and then go back. So I think that that's what would make the retro gaming so challenging on certain games.
Yeah, I got you there. And like you're saying with the open world, the closest games like that I can think of, the only one that was really any good is probably Legend of Zelda, which is kind of an open world where you can go wherever, but it's still, you go in a line one way and you realize you made a mistake and you have to go in that line back to find where you were. And then there was like I don't know if you ever played the Jurassic Park game for
Yep.
NES, which is just a dumpster fire.
Yep.
It's a completely open world. You can go wherever you want, but there's nowhere you want to go. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
There's no reason to go anywhere besides just on the path that they want you to go. And to go back to Zelda, I mean, I agree with you to a point, but you realize Zelda is just a big maze. That's really all it is.
It makes more sense. It's more of a maze than an open world. You have to find the right way to go.
So I would call it more of a I mean, you could call it per se an action game because of what they were able to do back then, but it was more of a puzzler.
Yeah, the world is a puzzle rather than go wherever you want, do whatever you want. You had to figure out the right path to get to the end in the most efficient way. Which I never got to the end of Legend of Zelda, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, I think that, and then one of my big things is no save points. I mean, that's the hardest thing. Is you got your 4 lives.
Yep.
And if you run out of them, you're done.
Well,
and it was always interesting to find ways that games made it possible to extend those 4 lives. Besides, putting in cheat codes like in Contra and in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, there was a code to get 30 lives. But aside from that, you kind of had to find your way to survive while also actually surviving the pitfalls of the game.
Exactly.
And I think that made it interesting. Adventure games nowadays, they dumb it way down. They can tell that you're not a very strong player, or they can tell that I'm not a very strong player from time to time. And like, the challenge will be really hard the first time, and then you die, and you go back to it, you die again, and then the third time it's like, wow, this is really easy, how come I couldn't do that? Like, they're just trying to prevent everyone from throwing their controllers across the room. And that's not as fun sometimes.
No, not at all.
Sometimes it's fun to get mad and to try and figure out the answer. Like, there's always an answer to make that battle easier. You just have to find it, and like, I think a lot of modern games kind of spoon feed that to you. If you lose enough times, they don't make you actually figure out the answer. I know there are some that, like the Dark Souls and things like that, that will keep challenging you and make it harder and harder, but most games are going the other way. They want people to win them rather than to... They want to tell their story that they put so much money into building and writing that they don't care whether it's actually challenging.
Exactly. I agree with you 100% with what you said there. It's just the other thing that I kind of want to bring up too is that you brought up kind of that there's no save points. You got to kind of also realize too is that the reason that there's no save points is these games were so short, and they were because you only had so much room because there was so much processing power inside the console, so they can only make them so big. So to actually, when the PlayStation came out, or even to the point of saving on cartridges, like the first Super Mario Brothers, that was kind of unheard of, because it's like, oh, I can pick up the game where I left off, and I don't have to start all over again. So that, I think that was one of there's very few things that are leaps and bounds that kind of changed the industry when it came to video games, and I think, ironically, with us being called a save point, was the invention of the save point.
Yeah, it's a great thing to have, but at the same time, you have to keep your game challenging. Like Legend of Zelda had save points. You could it would save at different points, and you could pick up where you left off. But I think the way it worked is you started back where you say. I think you started at the beginning,
Correct.
But you had all your items.
Correct.
Right?
You had all your items, but you always started back at the first cave where you got the first sword.
Right. So you still had to figure out the puzzle that was the maze of the
Correct.
game, which was the actual challenge of the Legend of Zelda. It wasn't these little guys that you just have to stab once with your sword. It's how do you get where's the actual end and how do you get there?
Exactly.
And can you remember the way?
Exactly.
So let's jump into the meat and potatoes. Like I said, we're going to do basically stand-up arcade games and any at-home console, pre-NES console. So let's start at the arcade. What was your go-to style of game? Tournament fighter, sports, just like your Contra beat-em-up game, racing, top-down shooters? What did you always go for when you go to the arcade?
I think it depended on my mood, but I usually had 3 different ones, and it's not going to surprise anybody. I love the Street Fighter, the tournament fighter type sort of games. That was great. Sports games, and then I liked, when it came to the arcades, I like actually having the gun in my hand and shooting, so
the 3D shooters. Yeah.
I always found it kind of fun to step on a pedal or pick the weapon up and then aim it, and that's when you came. I always kind of like those. As far as those, I think Virtual Cop was one of my really favorite shooter games that you had. It was sports, hands down, was Blitz. God, I loved to play Blitz. That was so much fun. And then I think for the tournament fighters, it's always a toss-up between Mortal Kombat and Marvel vs. Capcom. Those were always the biggest ones. Street Fighter a little bit, but I weaned my talents towards those two more.
Yeah, I would always go for I'd usually go for the beat 'em ups first, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Simpsons, those kind of games. And then I really liked racing games. What the actual sit in the car, driving, steering, everything like that. I've always been drawn to the racing games. I don't really know why. And then I would dabble in the tournament fighters. I'm not very good at them. In sports, the only sports games I would play are Blitz or NBA Jam. I wouldn't go and play Madden and all that in an arcade. Like I'd play Madden at home. And that's fine. So you talked about the tournament fighters were some of your favorite, and you said Marvel vs. Capcom, and what was the other one?
Mortal Kombat, hands down.
Mortal Kombat. Who is your go-to fight? Let's go with the major 4. So Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, and Marvel vs. Capcom. Who is your top fighter that you choose in each one?
So Marvel vs. Capcom, my top 2, and it was a 3-person tag team. My third person I could care less who I took. Sometimes I usually use the character from Stryker, so that ninja. I can never remember his name or say it correctly. But my two were Wolverine and Spider-Man. One, I have such a love for Spider-Man. I've been a Spider-Man freak since Spiderhead, whatever you want to call it, since I knew what Spider-Man was or who he was.
I'm with you on that one, but I never liked playing Marvel vs. Capcom with Spider-Man. Like I've always found him a little too weak in those games.
Speed, man.
And he's kind of hard to get his moves down. Yeah,
correct. It was all about speed.
I would always go with Gambit and Venom.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And maybe that's why I'm terrible at this game. But
Venom was extremely slow. People don't realize that. People thought that Venom was going to move as fast as Spider-Man was, and he didn't. So you had that, and then, like I said, Wolverine, just because of, once again, just how fast Wolverine can move. I love the fast moving. I've never been a tanky guy. I've never been a big brawler when it came to really any type of games. I like being the rogue. I like being the mage that could sit back and pick you off from other areas. So to use these type of characters in Marvel vs. Capcom just kind of fit my bill of I might have to hit the button 20 or 30,000 more times, but I'm okay with that. That's the character that I chose. You said,
and that's the way I kind of lean that same way now too, going with the speed over, like, I'm never going to play with Sentinel, one of those guys where they're just huge. And then, like, in the Injustice series now, I'll play with, like, Catwoman or the Flash over a lot of, beefier heroes, because you can get your moves in a lot faster and it's easier to land them, I always think.
As far as Tekken goes, honestly, I couldn't really even name you a person in Tekken because I had never played it. It never really caught my interest to play Tekken. I know that
Tekken was one of my favorites, but that was more on the at-home consoles on PlayStation. I would play with Eddie a lot, and he's like he dance fights basically, and you could just string together as one combo all day, and I would do
Yep.
that.
I think the thing that kind of threw me with Tekken was that it was more of that close encounter type sort of fighting melee, and I always thought it was a waste of a quarter or 2 quarters when I would play it because I just could never get it. I could never get in, and anytime that I did, I was always blocked. And I think I played it about. I think honestly in the arcade, I think I played it maybe 10 times that I could possibly even try to remember. And after at some point, I don't know if I can swear, but basically I just said fuck it. I'm just like, no, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So like I said, I just Tekken never really grabbed me.
There's always a strict delineation. There's a strict delineation between types of fighting games. Like you got your Marvel vs. Capcom and Street Fighter that are big into combos and knowing how to swing the joystick correctly, and then you've got like Tekken and Mortal Kombat where it's the combos come more from the button mashing than the joystick movement. And so I've always leaned more towards Tekken Mortal Kombat type play than where it's dependent on the buttons you're pushing more than the way you're moving the joystick. That's always stuck with my hands are more dexterous that way, I guess. So it's always interesting to see which type of fighting game you like because that'll say, like, I know if you like Tekken, then I can and I like Street Fighter, then I can probably beat you in Street Fighter because your hands aren't going to move.
Correct. Right. And that's a really interesting pick on there. To us talking about like the big 4 games. You're right. You got the Tekken and Mortal Kombat, which is more of the heavy combo on the right side, and then you got more of the heavy joystick movement on the left side for the other two. For Marvel vs. Capcom and Street Fighter. Ironically, though, my favorite one out of all of these, and the next one, with my character, is Mortal Kombat. I absolutely love Mortal Kombat, and maybe just because I kind of have that mindset that I kind of like blood and gore. I always thought that was cool. And then my character there was always Raiden. Obviously, everybody knew the back B or whatever it was for Scorpion, and you could cheese the game. And I always thought that was kind of cheating and kind of shitty that that's what people would do. So I took it upon myself to want to learn a different character, and I learned Raiden. And I've played as Raiden really on any type of Mortal Kombat that's come out that he's been in. I've always kind of mastered his moves. I love the whole lightning thing. I love he's all about diversion. If you really think about it, he's about diversion, trying to get behind you and trying to electrocute the shit out of you for it, or pushing you away from him and then moving around. So if you really understand the strategy of that character, he becomes a very, very powerful character for you. So that was mine in Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, I would always go with one of the ninjas, usually Reptile because I like green the best, but Reptile and Sub-Zero were probably my main two because I wasn't ever good with Scorpion. Not that I was very good with the others, but I don't know, I liked looking at them more than, I guess, the other ones, the other characters, but as I've grown older and played it, and kind of played with different people, I think you're right, Raiden's probably the best one to go with, and figure out how to, if you figure out Raiden's moves, you can beat almost anybody, because like you said, he can go back and forth, he used the lightning moves, he has his Superman fly across the room move that is very difficult to stop, and if they do block that, then you just teleport behind him and hit him with the uppercut that way. So as I've grown older and figured out how to play these games a little better, that Raiden's my go-to now, but it used to be Reptile and Sub-Zero.
Very nice. And then Street Fighter was, if people pronounce it, I pronounce it Ryu.
Go with that.
Yeah, go with that. Okay.
That's how I've
heard Ryu. I've heard, whatever. Which, if you actually want to, just side note, if you ever want to watch something extremely funny, do you know who Pete Holmes is, the comedian?
I think I've seen him.
He's
before.
The one that has, like, if you pull it up, it's the bad Batman spoofs.
Oh, yeah.
So he has one where he is the claims adjuster for insurance for since Street Fighter's a tournament. So he's the insurance guy for the tournament. So he's registering the fighters. So people are coming in as different Street Fighters, and he's kind of talking about them. And the guy that played Ryu is Mark Paul Gosselaar, which if you remember who he is, he's Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell. So he's all dressed up in the whole Ryu gear or whatever like that, and he's like, okay, we have to kind of realize what your names of your moves are. And he's the one where he swings his feet, his foot, like he spins his foot. And he's like, I can't even do it. He's just like, whatever. And like Pete Holmes is like, right, yeah. What are you saying there? He's like, I want a fruit cup. And I mean, it's just, and they just go back and forth. It's absolutely hilarious. So check that out. But as far as Ryu goes, once again, Ryu reminds me of Raiden without the actual lightning. I like his moveset. His movesets are not hard. It's not hard to pull off, but if you can pull out his combos, he becomes almost virtually unstoppable. Just because of how he can move. A lot of people who also like Ryu like Guile. I couldn't get into Guile, so I stick with my man Ryu. I really do.
Now, the only cool thing about Guile was the Sonic Boom move, and he had the huge flat top. Other than that, he didn't do it for me. I was always, I'd always go with Dalasan because I figured I was really bad at it. So I figured if I could stay as far away from as possible and still hit you, that I had an advantage. Mm-hmm. It never actually worked out that way, but that was always my thinking behind it. Yep.
Do you remember the best line in the Street Fighter movie? Did you ever
never saw it.
You never saw it. So Jean-Claude Van Damme plays Guile, and you got the guy that's playing M. Bison, and then the guy behind it that plays Zangief. They're watching on closed circuit TV, and there's a missile coming right at them, right at the camera that's at them, because they're just right on the other wall. And Zangief out of nowhere, he just goes, "Okay, quick, change channel." Yeah. So don't check out the Street Fighter movie though, because it's really horrible.
No, that's one of those you really want to hate yourself. That and Super Mario Brothers. It's I know enough. Usually I'll watch these movies because they're pop culture phenomenon and how bad they are. Mm-hmm. But those are just two that I know are just complete trash and not even worth the knowing what's going on in them to be up on any jokes that go around. It's not worth it.
Absolutely.
The thing I liked about going to arcades is that whenever you'd go to an arcade, it wasn't the same as the last one. There were no two arcades that were exactly the same, or there were pizza shops they'd only have 3 arcade games in them, and there were just all these places with stand-up arcade games that you could go, and you never really saw. They didn't all have the same games, but there were always these games that were at every one, and those always just drew me. It was The Simpsons and Rampage. I would always make sure if I was in an arcade with those games, I made sure I played them. What for you were those games that whatever arcade you were in, you made sure you found where that machine was and got your turn on it?
Obviously Mortal Kombat. I loved Mortal Kombat. I could pass on the Street Fighter and the Marvel vs. Capcom. So they were okay. But if there was a Mortal Kombat I had to play the Mortal Kombat. Especially if they had the newer one. So I remember the first time I saw that Mortal Kombat 2 was in arcade, I was like, holy shit, Mortal Kombat 2. So that one, ironically, and we talked about this a little earlier, was the Turtles. I love to be able to team up with, if somebody else had an extra quarter or something like that and wanted to do that, just to see how far you can get into Turtles. Just because that's what was hot back then.
I agree on Ninja Turtles. The only problem with growing up, there was only one place I knew that had the Ninja Turtles game. I never saw it anywhere else, and that was the Chuck E. Cheese in Jacksonville, Florida. That was the only one anywhere near me that had the Ninja Turtles game. So anytime we went there, I made sure to play it. But The Simpsons and Rampage, that was kind of the same thing with those. Is you had up to 4 players, and it was just whoever wanted to get on, you got on, and you played and saw how much. In Rampage, you saw how much you could destroy. In The Simpsons, like you said, you just want to see how far you can get, and who can help you get further.
And then I do have to throw out an honorable mention. So there's a place. I grew up in I'm from Chicago, so there's a place in the suburbs. There's a place called Hollywood Park, and this is the only place I ever saw this game, and it was Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. And it was literally him dressed up in his Smooth Criminal suit, and each player was a different color, and you had like lightning, or you had a different ability that popped out, and you were just going through and you were doing dance moves and beating up bad guys. It was such a fun game. But the problem is that you got to play it, and so many people wanted to play that game that 9 times out of 10 when you went to Hollywood Park, it was broken. Until finally they just got rid of it after probably about 2 or 3 years. But that has to be an honorable mention. I know that there's more than one copy of it, but it was such a good.
I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Yep, what is it? Yeah, Michael Jackson Moonwalker.
Michael Jackson Moonwalker.
Yep,
writing it down now. Yeah, that sounds awesome, and I hope I can find it and play it. Another one that I've recently got, so I always like playing Space Invaders. That was one that I would make sure I play. I like Space Invaders over Galaga, even though they're pretty much the same game. I don't know why, I just like Space Invaders better. And then the one that I've gotten into recently after reading Ready Player One is Joust, which I had never really heard of. And the way they describe it in the book, I was like, this game sounds awesome. I've got to play it. So I've found it, and now I've been playing it a lot, and it's very difficult and crazy, but I love playing it because it's just one of those like classic games where it doesn't matter that you're winning. It's just fun to play. And when quarters aren't really an option, it doesn't matter that you're terrible at it.
It kind of throws that whole thing, that thought process of when it comes to retro gaming to now games is some of the best games are just not that complicated. They're just, the difficulty level is high. I'll take like like to me, Dark Souls. Dark Souls to me is not that complicated of a game. You might get a little, tricky when it comes to trying to find out what your build wants to be and all of that. But the concept of it is not that hard. The actual playing of the game is hard. And that's what I think kind of pulls people in. Dead Cells. I don't know if you've heard of that new one for Switch. Same exact thing. It is not a complicated game at all. The stats, the stuff that you're doing is not complicated, but the actual gameplay of it is so addicting and so hard that it's so much fun. And I think that's right. Kind of where Joust comes in, is that there's nothing complicated about the game. It's just a tough game to play.
Right, yeah, but it's endlessly, when you don't have to worry about how many quarters you're spending on it, it's endlessly fun. Like, I could probably sit and play that game for an hour just trying to figure out how to beat the ostriches.
Yep.
Yeah, ostriches. So, yeah, that's another one that I've come onto recently that I really enjoy. Mm-hmm. I'm sure in Chicago you probably have more of this than we do where I live. How do you feel about, now there's 2 different types of this, the barcades that they're making today. So one is your Dave & Buster's, and the other is, I've seen these starting to pop up, is where they're actually old school arcades with beer. So you have real games that you can play, versus what Dave & Buster's is.
First off, I have never been to a Dave & Buster's. I know what they are. Oh no, I take that back. I have been to a Dave & Buster's. To me, it reminds me of a grown-up Chuck E. Cheese.
Yes, that's what it is.
And I am not the biggest fan of that. I always thought that was kind of a type sort of niche that people were able to kind of hold on to. But as far as the barcades go, the other kind that you're talking about, or the beercades, I think it's
beercades.
I think it's an absolutely wonderful idea. I can't remember and I don't want to try to promote another place, but there is one place here that actually, my really good buddy, he was getting married, and him and his wife, big gamers, all of that. We actually had the rehearsal dinner at a beercade. And it was nice. It was amazing. It was so much fun, and I can't remember what it was called. But it was just so much fun to just kind of walk in, because you didn't necessarily have to play. These were just like, go up and play a game. They're free. Type sort of thing.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. I mean, some games were, some of the arcade games, you had to pay tokens or whatever like that. But I would say probably about 70% of these games were absolutely free, and I loved it. Not because it was free or cheap or anything like that, but just to be able to pull up with your friend and say, "Hey, we're going to play this," and yet I have a beer in my hand while I do it. I think that's one thing that we kind of lost with online play is that whole LAN party or local. When you were, I'm 34. I'm not,
Getting four friends on a game of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
exactly. I mean, I'm 34. I don't know how old you are, but on a Friday, hey, we're gonna have a sleepover, and we're gonna come and we're gonna play until 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're gonna play the same game, but we all have to be in the same room to play it, and we're all on one screen.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so much fun. It was actually kind of interesting. So we do have a Save Point podcast Discord, so you can actually find the link on there, or on our iTunes, or when you go to Podbean. And if you join us, I have a lot of my local friends that are on it, obviously, because they like to support and they like to listen to the podcast. And one of the things that we actually did was, and it started with Monster Hunter. There was a Monster Hunter that came out on the 3DS. I believe it was Generations. And we all kind of basically said, why don't we all get together at somebody's house and spend the weekend? Now, this is 40 years ago, so I'm 30 years old, 31 years old. All my other friends are, between 28 and 30 or whatever like that. But it was just like, yeah, and I mean, we had a drunken stupor because, there was so much beer and all of that. But
Yeah.
But it was great. Like, I mean, they just came over and we camped out and we had TVs on and we had systems, and it just felt so cool to kind of have that atmosphere. So we actually try to do this 2 or 3 times a year now, when we can break away for a weekend. If somebody can come for the whole weekend, if somebody can come for just a night or a day, just kind of coming in, and we just, bring what you want. We actually, our last one that we had was actually another Monster Hunter. It was when Monster Hunter World came out, and I actually have a picture of my basement. I'm very fortunate to have a very, very big basement. I can host a lot of people. We actually had 9 TVs and 9 consoles all lined up.
Wow.
Around the perimeter of my basement, and and we're all playing with each other, playing the game with each other. So it was just so much fun. Like just that. So I think these beercades are just an awesome experience to kind of go back to childhood of what we grew up as gamers, because you also realize too that these developers that were making games, and these developers that started this industry have grown with us. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like the generation now that they're walking into the gaming industry and saying these things exist. We saw the progression of what the industry became to this online mecca of what it is now. So some of these kids now that grow up, they'll never know what a LAN party was. They'll never know what it felt like to stay up with your friends playing on an 8-bit system or a 16-bit system, together and
trying to get to World 8 in Mario.
Exactly, or passing the controller because you're playing a one-player game, and you guys are helping each other out because you just want to beat the game, not because you're worried about your own score,
Right.
So, sorry, I kind of rambled on with that one.
No, you're good. I completely agree. I'm not a fan. Like Dave and Buster's and those types of places, they're like fun to hang out at for like an hour, and then you're like, all right, I spent $50. I have 300 tickets, and I can get a pencil.
Yep.
Like I'm not a fan of ticket-based games. Like skee ball and Pop-A-Shot will always be endlessly fun,
Mm-hmm.
but like they're fun one time,
Mm-hmm.
and they're fun to spend your 50 cents or your dollar on. I don't want to sit there and that be my whole night, but
they're fun when you want to impress your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever you
whoever you came with.
Exactly.
Or they're fun to challenge. If you came with a group of friends, they're fun to challenge each other who can get the highest score, but it's only like one time. Like you don't want to sit there and, oh, I got 50 this time. Next guy's got to get 52. Oh, you got 52. Now I need to go again. I don't want to do that.
Yep.
But like with these other games where at beercades or arcades back in the day, you would just go and you would play, and
Mm-hmm.
you would play games with no point, like that you had no chance of ever beating because you didn't have enough quarters or there were other people waiting. Like you would just play it, you'd play for your 5 minutes or whatever, and then it was somebody else's turn, and you'd come back to it later when you got more quarters. And that's the thing. We don't, where I live in Florida, we don't have any beercades, and the first one I saw was when I was in Orlando a couple weeks ago. But I knew like they had to exist because everything exists pretty much at this point. And it was always my idea of like, that was my lottery idea. I'm just going to set up every arcade game I can find, every console I can find, just get a big building, and that's all it is. You pay a membership fee. You don't have to pay for the games. You come in and you play. But so that's when I started seeing those popping up. I was like, I want one of the, like, I would be there every weekend if this were available to me. I would go and I would play arcade games and just hang out. And like, I don't really like spending time with people, but if I could spend time with people and just jump on a game of NBA Jam with them, I would.
Exactly. I cannot agree with you more on that. It's just, it's bragging rights. That's what it comes down to with those types of games. It's bragging rights. I was able.
It's bragging rights, and it's let's see how far we can get to in some of these other games. X-Men, Simpsons, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Let's see how far we can get.
Yep.
Let's see who's better, and you rack up a score while you're going, but your score doesn't really matter because you're both or all four in it together trying to get to the end.
Absolutely.
I miss those days.
Me too, man. Me too.
So let's move on to at-home consoles. You are the expert on this area, so you run through everything you want to run through on at-home consoles. When you get to Atari, I'll jump in.
Okay, so my first at-home console, I kid you not, was a computer. It was my father's. It was a Zenith. I couldn't give you any specs on it. All I know is that it ran off 3.5 floppies, if you remember what those are. And my favorite game on there was a game called Castle. And Castle, basically, I don't know if you remember the old DOS computers. That's what it was. It was a DOS computer. So it didn't have any Windows.
Yep, I had one.
So you had one. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. So remember the emojis that, or what were their smiley faces? Like you would have one that was an outline, and then you had one was like kind of filled in or whatever. So in this game, Castle, basically it was, you would go through and you would find, it was a text-based game, but you would actually see it like on the half of the screen. You would actually see your little guy, which was just a little head, and you would move it and you would find things that are sitting. So it could be a plus sign. So you would go up to the plus sign and you would hit left on it, and then the text would say, you have picked up a sword. And then you could go into another thing and you would find another person moving around and it'd be like, werewolf is hunting you, type sort of things. And basically the thought of it was, the premise of the game was to get out of the castle and find a way out of the castle. So I remember that. I really can't tell you anything more than that. It's just, I just remember playing hours and hours and hours of that. And that's what really kind of started to hook me on video games.
Yeah, that sounds like a very fun one to just get lost in.
Yeah, it was.
It seems like like you said, you just play for hours and you'd feel like you were getting somewhere even if you weren't.
And then there was a game called Commander Keen that came out. And Commander Keen, you were this boy that fell asleep, or not fell asleep, but during the night, aliens came down to Earth, and you had to go through different levels, and you had to get rid of the aliens before night became day, and would ruin the whole world. And it was like one of those, like his helmet was a football helmet. So you just go through as a 2D scroller. There was a couple of them, but no, Commander Keen was one of another favorite game of mine. And then I remember it was a Christmas. In fact, the first couple of consoles that I had pre-NES were actually Christmas presents. I remember waking up and I remember Christmas and my dad saying, "Hey, there's something else downstairs." And I went downstairs and we had you would walk down a set of stairs and you could either turn left and you would go into our living room, or you could turn right and go into our laundry room. And then my dad had kind of a little office area, that storage office area. And what he did was he kind of moved around and he got this old Zenith TV, big tube TV, and put under a piece of gift wrap, like wrapping paper, was an Atari system. And just all of these games, I had no idea where he got it from. I know that it was used because I know that there was no box. He had he had 4 controllers. He had 4 joysticks. And then there was probably, there had to be about 13 games, 14 games that we played. That's where I fell in love with Pitfall. And I played.
I never played Pitfall because Atari was the first one we had at home. It was my parents. They had it before either me or my brother were born. So they had it, and then just every once in a while they would plug it in, and we probably had 15 games, like you said, and we would just play for a few hours and then put it away because those were games that you jump in and out of. Like it didn't, you weren't ever making it anywhere in them. But Pitfall was one that I never. We didn't have that one because that was it. Like at that time, it was here's your 15 games. These are the games you have, and these are the ones you play.
Correct.
There wasn't like you couldn't go rent them at the Redbox or at Blockbuster even at that point, because like later with PlayStation stuff, you could go to Blockbuster and you could get a game for a weekend. But these are your 15 games. Maybe you're lucky if you're at a flea market sometime, you might find a couple more, but for the most part, these are your games. This is what you're going to play.
Yep, exactly. So Pitfall was one of my bigger ones that I played. Dig Dug was another one. And I would really kind of say, I mean, Frogger. We had the Frogger, and there was one game, and I want to say it was called Centipede, but I know it wasn't Centipede. And basically, it was kind of a premise of you had to move through tunnels, and you had to make sure that the tunnel didn't fall on you, and all of that. And as you would dig through certain things, and all that, so it was a lot of fun. I remember my dad. I had it for about a year. And my dad came down and he was playing with it. My dad's never really been that big of a gamer. He never really kind of knew the draw of it. But, me being his son, he kind of wanted to get into it with me. So he was playing one time. And what happened was, I don't know if the controller got wrapped on him or whatever. He ended up getting up and he moved, and the whole Atari system just fell off.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so it just broke. So he was devastated, and I never came from a rich family, so it wasn't like they could just go out and get another one. And back then, I still believed in Santa Claus and all of that. Sorry if there's any kids listening, but Santa Claus is real. But
he'll be coming soon.
He'll be coming soon. So I mean, I know that it was hard. It was a hardship for my parents once I kind of found that out. And that next year, that's when the Sega Genesis started really kind of kicking in, and Nintendo had come out and all of that, and I really, really, really wanted one. And I know that my parents couldn't afford one. So this is the console came out pre-NES, but I got it when the NES was already released, and that was the Sega Master System. And I played the shit out of that console. I was in love with it. I absolutely loved everything about it. My favorite game, which I call now, this was the original Dark Souls, if you want to call it, and that was Kenseiden, Kenseiden, and basically you were a samurai. Literally, the word in Japanese means sword saint legend or legend of the sword master. And basically it was a 2D platformer, side scroller, and it was hack and slash, and you were this samurai, and you went through, and it was probably the closest thing to what would be rated a mature rating.
Yeah.
And it was just such a great game. Such a great game. I played that game. I think I've beaten that game probably, if I have to pick a game that I've beaten the most of in my lifetime, it's probably been that game. Just because I would beat it and then I'd start it all over again, just because it was that good.
I had never even really heard of Sega Master System, but I'm looking at it on Wikipedia right now. Mm-hmm. So this was the first one that had like a real directional pad and buttons, as opposed to like Atari had your joystick and your one button. Maybe some games I remember there was a joystick that had 2 buttons, and there was like the paddle that had 2 buttons, but most games didn't use that.
Nope.
So yeah, that looks. So this is technically pre-NES, but it looks like it's the same kind of type of system as NES.
Yep. Yep, it was very, very close.
I'll give you your credit on that one.
You're giving me my credit on that one?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I think if you really look at it, I think maybe it's not. I believe, let's see, the Nintendo Entertainment System was in 1983 in Japan, and the Sega Master System was 1988 in Japan. So I can't even really count that. Kind of.
I'll give it to you, though, because I had never heard of it, and you brought something new to me.
Oh, really?
Something I'm going to go look for and try to play now.
Oh, it's so such a good system.
I'll allow it here.
The coolest part about, or one of the coolest parts about this system was that it already had a pre-game loaded. So it was a racing game. It was like a motocross racing game, and you didn't have to put a cartridge in there. You just turned on the system and it automatically loaded for you.
Yeah, that's impressive for that time.
Exactly. Now this was the other thing too. So I had this for about 2 or 3 years, and there was a secret game, and I didn't realize it was a secret game, but it was a secret game. And what you did was, so Sega would come across the screen like it always did. And as it did that, as it came across the screen, you had to tap the up and the A and B buttons. And then when it actually held and it stopped, you actually had to hold the buttons. And if you did it right, the whole thing would slide to the right or to the left, and you actually had a maze game that you went through. And you had cool. You actually had a certain amount of time to make it through the maze, and you just kept going through all these mazes as long as you beat it before the time ran out.
So that brings up another good question. Were you ever a Easter egg hunter? Like, did you go looking for them? Did you read about them in the magazine, then want to do them, or did you just play the game for what it was?
I was kind of dumb to it. I really didn't know what they were. And the reason being is that when I grew up, so, like I said, my father got me my systems, or my mom and dad for Christmas got me my systems. But I was, my father and my mother were very much on the, if you can be outside, you're going to be outside type sort of thing.
Yeah, I was the same way.
Yeah. So
we would get 30 minutes at a time to play video. Like, I would get 30 minutes and my brother would. And like, sometimes we could combine our 30 minutes if we wanted to play a game together.
Correct. So I would be able to play these games and all of that, but I was always playing baseball, or I was, during the winter I was playing, basketball or something like that when I really kind of got into video games. And then I ended up getting, long story short, I ended up getting a used Nintendo system, from my aunt. It was my cousin's, who actually got me really, really into the Nintendo scene. My cousin Mike, and he basically, what he did was he got a Super Nintendo and he gave me his NES, and basically all the games that he had, he gave them to me. So there was one Christmas I woke up and I had a Nintendo system, an NES system, and I kid you not, I probably had 40 games that came right off the bat.
Nice.
Yeah, just because
That's
he gave
Christmas.
Yeah, it was. So I kind of got into that. So I kind of just flew through. So when I kind of figured out what Easter eggs were, I kind of was already past a lot of those older games that I didn't want to go back to and try to find the Easter egg.
Right. Yeah, they're not worth playing just for that. They're fun to go back and play, but you're not going to spend hours looking for this somebody's name written.
Correct.
On the last page that you'd never find, like, going through the game. If you're going to replay these games, I'm the same way. I never looked for them, and like, I wasn't a Nintendo Power subscriber or anything like that, so I was ignorant to their existence for the most part, and you'd hear kind of rumors of, oh, there's this secret thing and you can do this, and it's like, all right, or I can just play and have fun.
And that was the other thing too, is I actually ended up taking like a hiatus from gaming. So I had like the NES and I had the Super Nintendo because, like I said, I played NBA Jam, and that was really kind of about it. And then I really started to get into sports, like I said, and other things. And I took a long break all the way up to a PlayStation. I never owned an N64. I never owned a Genesis. I never owned a Virtual Boy or a GameCube or anything like that. I went straight to a PlayStation, and I didn't even know what a PlayStation was. It was kind of, once again, it was a Christmas present. I'm telling you,
that's where we got ours.
Yeah, all my consoles came as Christmas presents, and it was one that my parents thought we would like, and they got it for us. And the first game that they got for us was Madden 94 or Madden 92 or whatever it was. And so I played Madden. So I really never kind of got into the adventure games until I really kind of started to explore again what the PlayStation can do. And then by the time that really kind of hit is when I kind of really started researching the Easter eggs and all of that. And then I kind of went back to my old systems to kind of find some of these, but never really ever back to
once the internet was there and the information was easy to find.
Yeah, exactly.
We were the same way. So we had an Atari that belonged to my parents, and then we got an NES. I think my brother got it for his birth. Same situation as you. It was used, I think, because my mom was a basketball and volleyball coach, so it was like somebody on her team that was in high school like didn't want it anymore, so we got it basically. Probably 20 games with that when we got it, and then we didn't get anything new until PlayStation, and we got that on Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason we knew about it is because our friend down the road had one. He had one for 6 months or whatever before we did. And I mean, we didn't even get a game for the PlayStation for a while. We just wore out the demo disc that came with it pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you're right. We had Madden and the demo disc.
You got 12. You got one level of 12 games, and you just go for it.
Exactly. That's actually where the demo disc is where I actually played Metal Gear Solid. There was a demo disc with the original Metal Gear Solid
demo disc.
Yeah, probably. And I played the crap out of it. And by the time I actually got the game, I was like, oh my god, I can't believe how expansive this game is. But I mean, I was kind of already like a pro at it because I probably played the demo 1,000 times. And I got to the point where I was kind of just like, like you got so good in a level that you would just kind of play around in it and be like, oh, okay, I could do this. And this guy still doesn't see me. And, I knock the guy out and wait for him to wake back up. And then I hide again and then knock him out again.
Yeah, you find because you can only play that one level, you find these little challenges you can give to yourself.
Yep.
Within that level.
Yep.
Yeah, that was always a fun. And then there was, on that same demo disc, there was a demo for Medieval.
Yep.
Where you're like this little skeleton guy walking around. It's just an adventure game. And that was a timed one. So I would always just see how far I could, like sometimes I would go and explore everything I could in the time. And the other times I would see how far I could get on the path. Because it was like kind of open world, but there was a linear path you were supposed to follow. Mm-hmm. So that one was always fun to play.
Yep.
Going back to Atari real quick, I just want to go over some of my favorite games.
Okay.
One of my all-time favorites was Berserk, which would apparently give you seizures if you ever beat it. Luckily, I never got that far. Did you ever play Berserk?
I would have to look it up. I don't remember it. I don't remember any seizure-causing games.
Well, so it's this, you're a little robot, and you move around with the joystick, and you got your one button to shoot your gun at other robots, and there's like 3 or 4 robots on each screen, and it's kind of a maze that you have to go between screens, and like I could see how it would cause seizures, because every time you die, like you hit a wall or one of the villain robots hits you, it just flashes really bright and makes this terrible sound. And
I remember this game. I didn't realize it was called
Berserk. It's not fun to lose, but it's not fun to lose, but it was a pretty fun game to play and just kind of wander around in. There's another one that I played a lot. It was a Spider-Man game, and like you said, I'm all in on Spider-Man and have always been. Where you have, like, you're just in front of a building and you have to climb up the building, and there's different enemies as you go up the building that you have to tackle, and then Green Goblin's like flying across the top. Mm-hmm. Have you ever played that one?
Yes, that was just called Spider-Man.
Yep, I don't know if I think I got past the first level once, but it was still just endlessly fun to climb that building and try and get past Green Goblin.
It was so damn hard. God, as being a little kid, I mean, get off us now that we're older and we probably would find it easy. But I mean, now, I mean, it was hard. It was a hard game.
Well, it was hard because like you couldn't really point your webbing where you wanted it to go.
Correct.
So you would try and stick on the building, but really it would hit the window where it doesn't stick, and then you'd fall, and you'd try and grab it and grab it and grab it, and just wouldn't happen. And then my last one, I always like playing tanks. Just the basic We had like a 16-in-1, or it probably wasn't. That was probably like an 8-in-1, where you had tanks and you could do
Mm-hmm.
submarines, which was really the same. It was just a blue background instead of a red background or whatever.
Yep.
But we always had a lot of fun. That was a good multiplayer that me and my brother would play together a lot, and that was a good see who can win and get bragging rights for the rest of the week, pretty much.
Yeah, my cousin and I used to play tanks all the time. When he would come over, we'd always play tanks, and yeah, that was a great game.
So yeah, that was. Did you have any other honorable mentions that you want to mention pre-NES time that you played at a friend's house or anything like that?
No, I don't think so. I remember that there was a Cookie Monster game, and basically it was just so you could eat all these cookies, but I can't remember.
They still have that. My daughter plays that on a tablet now.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I think that would be just an honorable mention because that was just one of those, you just get so good at it, you don't even have to look at the screen anymore.
Yeah.
But no, I think that would be about it. God, this has been thinking about it. I kind of want to see if I can find an Atari now.
Find an Atari and find a way to. They have like my parents got me one a few years ago. It's basically like the NES Classic for Atari that comes with the 80 games or whatever built in. I don't know why they limited it to 80. I'm sure on a 16 gigabyte hard drive you could probably fit every game that was ever created, but
Absolutely.
I'm not making it. So yeah, you can find them. They're in like Target and on Amazon if you do want to go back and revisit some of those old games.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to get my daughter into playing it. She's 4, and she didn't like we tried a couple games on the Atari. She wasn't for it, but she'll play some Nintendo games every once in a while.
Oh, very nice.
She's a little young to get into older ones, but yeah, I got to start them early.
I have almost a 2-year-old daughter, and she loves to sit on my lap when I play Switch, and she'll just stare at it. Or she has now. When I pick up a PlayStation controller, I have an old PlayStation 3 controller that I give her, and she'll kind of sit on the couch as long as her attention allows her to, and we'll pretend that she's playing with me and all of that. So we got a couple pictures of it. So you got to start them young, man. Got to start them young.
Yeah, we'll do that with my 2-year-old. We'll give her the controller that's not plugged into anything, but my 4-year-old, she can actually. There's a couple games. There's like some Mickey Mouse games and some Sesame Street games for Nintendo that she can play, and she'll sit there and play. Mm-hmm. She'll go through them, and she gets really excited when she wins, which is really easy, and that's always fun to watch and see her figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So you got about another year. She'll be able to play the NES Classic with you.
There we go. I'm looking forward to it. I really am.
All right, that's all we got for part 1 of Old School Video Games. Thank you, Dan, from the Save Point. You want to give your plugs again one more time, just so people remember where to find you?
Absolutely. And just before I do that, I just want to say thank you for having me on yours. On a podcast about something. This has been such a fun time reminiscing about retro games. I hope we can collaborate again on another project. I really do. But yes,
we might bring you back for part 3 or 4 too.
Awesome. I'm looking forward.
I've already got a guest for part 2, but we might be bringing you back for 3 or 4 because this was good.
Absolutely. I look absolutely forward to it. But yes, please check out the Save Point podcast. We put out everything. We don't necessarily have a date that we put everything out, but we are on a weekly type sort of thing. So basically every week, or you can just hit that subscribe button on iTunes or on Google Play or Podbean or wherever you're at and automatically download to your mobile device or whatever it is. We do have a link to our Discord. On every site that you go to, that link is there. So please join our Discord. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of great people on there, a lot of great discussion. Podcast. We give you a voice on what you want to hear us talk about on the podcast. We had a couple of people kind of submit, topics, and we actually talked about them. So it's very open. So please check us out, Save Point Podcast. And once again, just thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot.
And now it's time for the 2-minute ISO.
I watched Super Troopers 2 recently, and I did not have high hopes for it going in, but it was actually pretty funny. The guys from Broken Lizard are always great. I love all their movies. Super Troopers, Club Dread. They got one called the Slam and Salmon, which not a lot of people have seen. They did parts in the Dukes of Hazzard movie that was pretty bad, but they had the best parts of it. They're always funny. They play really well off of each other, and it doesn't fail in Super Troopers 2. They come back. They do a lot of callbacks to jokes in the first movie, which it could get a little old. I wasn't paying great attention to it, so maybe that's why it wasn't like, oh, this is just the same joke from the first movie. But honestly, the jokes were funny, and you go back and watch Super Troopers, they're still funny, and now you watch it in Super Troopers 2, and they're still actually pretty funny. I wouldn't recommend watching Super Troopers and then Super Troopers 2 right back to back because you're going to run into this. They're making the exact same joke over and over again. But if you watch them, like if you haven't seen Super Troopers in a while and you queue up Super Troopers 2, you'll definitely get a laugh from it. The plot's kind of stupid, but that's kind of what Broken Lizard does. The Super Trooper guys are hired to, there's a town in Canada which is getting annexed into the US because of some border dispute. And it's not really going to be a dispute because the mayors of the towns and have figured it out and what to do with it. But in the meantime, while the transition is going on, they need a police force. So the guys from Super Troopers go to be the police force for that after being, fired from their local job in Vermont years previous because of an incident that happened with Fred Savage, which is pretty funny. They come back into police work by going to this town in Canada and being the policeman there, and hijinks ensue as they have some run-ins with the local Mounties and things like that. And they have a mystery to solve about some contraband that is going to go up in value based on the fact that it's legal in Canada, but it's not legal in the U.S. So it's a fun romp. It's a good way to spend an hour and 45 minutes. It's a perfect length. They don't run too long like a lot of comedies today do. Usually I'm not a fan of the comedy sequel, especially the comedy sequel after, it's been 12, 13 years now. No, it's been almost 20 years, I think, since the original Super Troopers. So yeah, that's a long gap. And the Broken Lizard guys definitely don't lose a step. Beer Fest, that's another one. Good movie from Broken Lizard is Beer Fest. Anyway, the Broken Lizard guys don't lose a step. They still have the same cachet, and they have the same, back and forth between each other. It's always good to see him rag on Farva, and just it's good to have the gang back. It feels a lot better to have this gang back than it did like going back to Anchorman 2. That for some reason Anchorman 2 didn't work as well as this worked, at least in my opinion. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you're on iTunes, rate, review, subscribe, and all that. You can follow us on Twitter at APA something and send feedback through emails, a podcast about something at gmail.com. Stay classy.